Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen. I'm the managing director of the AMA. Thank you so much for coming today. I wanted to start by saying there's a lot of new faces in the webinar today. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Please, if you're not a member or a partner, we hope that you will visit the website and look into joining. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me. I'll drop our website and my email in the chat in just a minute, and you can feel free to ask me any questions you might have. I do want to note that after today's webinar, we will be charging non-members and non-partners an attendance fee. So keep that in mind moving forward. And we're going to start off today. I'm going to kick it to Pat Bates, our Director of Programming, to get things started.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for all your hard work organizing, promoting, and setting up this event. This is a topic that we're all very eager to learn more about, and who better to learn from than this incredible team who have not only been participating in this arena since its inception, but shaping it as well. I'm talking about none other than Marc, Duron, Sam Summerskill, and our own AMA Director at Large, Gregg Lhotsky. A little bit about Marc. Marc's work has spanned the creative advertising, communications, media, and innovation spaces for nearly 2 decades through agency and in-house roles in the arts, culture, and entertainment spaces. In his most recent role, Vice President at Playboy, he oversaw the iconic brand's channels, talent initiatives, and digital marketing, was a lead on the Web3 and blockchain innovation team, focused on the launch of the brand's first generative NFT collection, Rabbitars, led culture initiatives like Playboy, Art Basel Surrealist Ball during Art Basel Miami, and the launch of the refurbished Playboy Jet. Today, he's the head of innovation for Great Bowery, a role that joins his passion for innovation with his knowledge of communications and marketing, powered by his passion for the arts. Next, I'd like to welcome Sam Summerskill. Having been an agent for 20+ years, Sam is the director of the UK office of BNA, representing some of the world's preeminent illustrators, animators, photographers, and now Web3 NFT artists. Sam spearheaded the successful launch of Macbeth's Cellmates NFT drop this past fall, which sold out in less than 30 seconds. Sam collaborates with Marc and the teams at GB for all things Web3. And last, but definitely not least, the Global Managing Director of BNA, fellow board member, Director at Large of the AMA, and moderator of today's webinar is Gregg Lhotsky. For most of his career, Gregg has nurtured the careers of creative people. BNA represents over 150 artists, including photographers, illustrators, CGI and animation studios, stylists, hair and makeup artists, directors, and production companies. Operating out of their New York City offices, he runs a team of agents and support staff in New York, London, Berlin, and affiliates in China and Australia. Thank you so much, Gregg, for putting this exciting event together, and congratulations on shattering our webinar attendance record. And now over to you, Gregg.
Well, thanks for that, Pat, and thanks, Jen, for organizing this, and welcome everybody. So we have a lot to cover today, and it seems that we have a lot of people from various different places in our community. I think 50% of people here today are members. We also have some artists on board, some partners and potential partners. So welcome, and it seems like from the energy around this, everybody has a similar type of questions and curiosities. So for the next 40 minutes or so, Marc and Sam will take you guys through what is this world, you know, in terms of NFTs, what's the metaverse, how do I navigate this landscape, you know, with my for my talent, for my clients, you know, and what do we do in this marketplace? Marc and Sam will talk about some of the frequently asked questions and dispel some of the myths in this. And we certainly encourage you guys to put questions in the chat, and these guys will, all of us will be happy to answer that at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Marc, and he'll take us through it.
Hi, sorry, I had a mute malfunction. First of all, thank you everybody for joining. I know that Web3 in and of itself is such a curiosity inducer. In fact, Sam and I and Greg have had the privilege to work on an incredible program that Sam will talk to you more about later in this presentation. But ultimately, the idea of Web3 and what we're about to share with you is a combination of both sort of fortuitous paths that led us to where we are today, but also a never-ending curiosity. I think what has underpinned the past year for Greg, Sam, and myself is this idea of reinvigorating a space in which art really is the preeminent and the most prominent piece of the puzzle here. It's the only reason Web3 exists. The second reason I'll get into, but we're very excited for you all to join us, for us to chat about Web3 and ultimately involve you in our passion and really talk about what the future looks like as it relates to both artists, the representation of art, and how art connects to consumers and how that connection can actually be harnessed by brand partners, by third-party entities to really drive community. First part of this presentation will be up to me. I'm going to walk you through really quickly what Web3 is, our approach to innovation and Web3 in general, and then Sam is going to give you some really fabulous insights in terms of a project, maybe, and I won't put words in Sam's mouth, but maybe our favorite project of last year. And we'll save some time at the very end for any questions. We're here to chat with you. This can be an open-ended dialogue. So as I take you through this, please jot down questions, throw them in the chat. Greg, Sam, and I are available to you afterwards. And many thanks again to Jen and to Pat and Greg for setting this up. We're very excited to chat with you. So without further ado, Great Bowery, just to give everyone a sense of who we are, if you don't know it, we're an aggregation of a number of brands. B&A, who is on this call today, is one of them. And B&A has also been one of the brands within our portfolio that's been most interested in pushing innovation to the forefront. To give you a sense of Great Bowery overarchingly, portfolio of brands, we work with everyone from B&A, as I mentioned, to CLM. The COVID Tour is part of our portfolio. We work in the spaces of the creation of new brands through the GBI incubator and a bit more. When it comes to the idea of innovation, something that we really thought about quite a bit last year is this statement of create forward. I think very often agents and artists are so often on the receiving end of a creative brief. I spent, as Pat had mentioned, many years on the client side of the business, formulating RFPs and formulating briefs and coming up with creative concepts with agency and creative partners. And what we would do is to bring, and this is a personal opinion as well as something we thought about at Great Bowery, we brought creatives into the mix maybe too late in the game. So what we have started to do and what our rallying cry for this year is to create forward, really to challenge that status quo and to say, as creatives, as representatives of creatives, we are here to actually talk to you about what you would like to accomplish and achieve before you've decided what you'd like it to look like. And ultimately, that idea of involving the artist and creating forward has spearheaded everything that we've been focused on over the past 14 months. Generally, it's led us to this idea of innovation. As Pat mentioned, I spent a majority of my career in the fashion space. I worked for MoMA, I worked for Soho House, I worked for Airbnb and American Express, and ultimately landed at Playboy, which is where I was introduced to Web3 for the very first time. And we'll talk about that in a second. But generally, this idea of innovating and pushing forward Web3 has been a large rallying cry for the innovation team at Great Bowery. We're happy to offer consultancy, strategic development and planning, everything from strategic partnership ideation and introductions to tokenomics and the customization related to NFTs, which Sam's going to tell you more about later. But ultimately, this 360 approach to innovation and Web3 services is something that we've centralized not only for clients that choose to work with Great Bowery and our agencies, for example, the brands that we all know and love, but also for the talent that we represent. how can we actually innovate both for our clients and for our talent simultaneously within this space has been a big question that we've asked ourselves, and something we continue to change and continue to evolve on as we iterate. But ultimately, it comes down to where did it come from? And I think oftentimes I like to start, way back. When you think about innovation in general, innovation comes out of hardship. And I think we often think of innovation as being, what is the next Uber, or how did we reinvent the dating landscape, or what did we do related to food delivery services? If you think about human evolution and our constant need to innovate, it's usually born out of a problem solution mentality. There's a problem, we have found a solution, and it has changed our way of doing things. And if you think about those things, the trajectory of human evolution has just really crazy spiked over the past 40 years. And what we've actually seen year over year, and especially in the past 2 years, is this incredible 3-digit exponential increase in human innovation as it relates to how people connect with one another. And again, I give you this graph here to really illustrate what brought us to Web3. And when you think about human evolution and this idea of one thing begets another, 2006 SARS, for example, the benefit and the innovation that came out of that was this idea of a centralized community as it relates to food delivery systems, the way that we interact with one another generally. Bitcoin coming out in the early 2010s actually is where Web3 began. And it led to ultimately this idea of a consumer audience that we're calling the crypto native. And again, we've talked about digital natives. In fact, I think we might all be tired of hearing the term digital nomad. But something that we've been really thinking about is how to focus in on what we call the crypto native. This crypto native is you. It is me. It's a bunch of people on the internet. It's individuals that Sam and I chat with on Discord all the time. But ultimately, we tend to think of these crypto native individuals as being gamers, or you think of them as individuals that have no name and no face. But the cool part and the reality of the crypto native is it's the digital native, but it's everybody. And the reality of decentralized thought, and we'll get into what that philosophy and what that term means, is that it's all of us connected. In fact, what we're doing right now is a decentralized chat. We have one common interest, Web3. We're sitting here talking about an individualistic approach to what we're doing from a niche perspective, artist management, and brand specific work. However, we're actually brought together right now by AMA, by Jen, by Pat, by Greg, to discuss what Web3 actually means. Crypto natives are interested in doing that. They just want to do it in a way that feels more integrated. So it leads us to this question of what is Web3? And I get this all the time. And ultimately, there's a difference between centralized thinking and decentralized thinking. And for Web3, you're going to hear the term decentralized pretty frequently. You also hear the term Web3, which makes you wonder what was Web 1 and what was Web 2. Web 2 is actually where we are today. If you think of Web 1 as the old school internet, it was dial-up internet. It was I'm going to turn on my computer, connect to my modem and router, click, go online, go make myself a sandwich, come back 7 minutes later, it might still be connecting. But that was Web 1. It was this idea of being able to log on to the internet. It was the early 90s where, previous to this, in order to find information, you had to go to Barnes Noble or your local library. For those of us that know how to utilize a card catalog, that's how we found our information. The internet itself was revolutionary in that it allowed us to connect with information faster. We could do it from our home. Might have taken 7 minutes to connect, but we were actually able to not only find things more quickly, but also talk to each other. In fact, Web 1 is comprised of AOL chat rooms. And I normally, if we were in person, would say, raise your hand if you had an AOL screen name, if you joined AOL chat rooms. And if you remember back then, the premise of AOL chat rooms was to get together to talk about things you cared about. I lived in Mexico City and I had always wanted to go to New York. So I used to join the New York chat room to say, what's it like to live there? I may or may not have been in the Hanson fan chat room to talk about my then favorite musicians. But the reality is AOL was a very nascent community. It was a very new way for us to connect. And Web 2 is that, but on steroids. Web 2 is what we call the algorithm. Web 2 is Amazon and Alexa are listening. It is recommendations on shopping. It is trackable algorithms. It tells you how many people viewed your post, whether or not your story was engaged with, how many times a link was clicked, and whether or not that person clicked on that link and went down the path to purchase your product. Web 2 is a centralization of all of this information. It's a growth on Web 1, and it actually provides consumers with easy to understand recommendations and basically like the easiest way to connect with one another in a way that's trackable. Now, Web 3 coexists with Web 2, and often people say, is Web 3 replacing Web 2? The answer is no. Again, a personal opinion and something that I've found over the course of the past 6 years is that Web 3 is actually an evolution of what we saw within Web 1. It's bringing us back to basics. The idea of centralized thought, meaning the algorithm and everything tracking for us, which, by the way, can sometimes feel invasive, but also often is very easy. For example, I had to buy a mattress, and I started thinking about mattresses and searching for them, and all of a sudden I was served an ad, and that's actually where I found it. But Web 3 is its antithesis in that it's bringing us back to basics. The beauty of connecting with one another based on shared values from our AOL chat room days is what we're actually seeing with Web 3. It's just done in a gamified way that feels new. We'll talk about the blockchain, we'll talk about what NFTs are and how they work, but ultimately Web3 is not just an entity. It's not just the internet. It's a school of thought. Web3 is a philosophy. Web3 is a community, and Web3 is made up and comprised of every single one of us. And often people say, well, who is a Web3 person? What do they do? Where do they live? And how do you connect with somebody who's anonymous? And I give you this insight from my time at Playboy, but we elevated community moderators on the Discord for the Rabbitars themselves in order to help provide guidance to other people on what they can and cannot talk about based on those shared value systems. And I got to speak with a construction worker in his 50s in Marion, Louisiana, a school teacher for primary school in Spokane, Washington, a med student in Pakistan, a surfer in Australia, and a tech engineer in Tokyo on a daily basis, because that's who your community is. And the thing that brought them together was a love of human rights, which is what Playboy was espousing in Web3 when we launched. And the ideas that we pulled together is this idea of beauty, of art, and human rights interwoven. And I would never have met these people save for Web3. So the exciting thing about Web3 is it's every single one of us together. The best part of Web3 is the decentralized nature. A lot of the cons of Web3 can be the decentralization, the barrier to entry for the everyday consumer. But ultimately, Web3, as we see it and as it evolves, is an evolution of what we already know. It's AOL chat rooms, but for today. It's this idea of instant information for tomorrow. And ultimately, Web3 brings us down a path of, how it works. Easy graphic to understand. Web 1, our old school days, MSN, Internet Explorer. Not sure if you guys remember Clippy from Microsoft Office, but he was also part of Web 1. Web 2, everything we know today, it's the algorithm, it's Amazon Web Services, it's Uber, it's Snapchat, it's TikTok. Web 3 is the Web 3 of tomorrow. It's the internet of interconnectivity with no intermediaries, that's decentralized, and really the onus on ensuring that Web 3 is a safe and happy place relies on us. It relies on each one of us individually to make sure that we're doing what we want to be doing and seeing what we want to be seeing. It doesn't rely on Twitter's police state is what you hear from Web3. It doesn't rely on Amazon Web Services saying these are things that you can consume or think about. It relies on each one of us to say this is what we want to talk about. And ultimately, we asked ourselves this question 1,000 times over last year, why Web3? And ultimately, it started as a gaming mechanism. I think you'll find a lot of corollaries with the gaming system. Sam and I both love gaming as a personal elements. He can tell you about his Pokemon explorations and more, but ultimately what we see with Web3 is a growth element and trajectory. If it started with gaming, it has since quite eclipsed that. In fact, cryptocurrency itself, Bitcoin, Ethereum, blockchains, what we're actually looking at today is that these ways of interacting with consumers is growing. And what we're very excited about is to see the growth of female artists and female audiences in Web3. It's a really great barometer to understand that, this is not a heavily male-dominated space, although it can be decentralized and that it might be semi-anonymous, that, what we're looking at is larger interest levels from differentiated groups of individuals. And it all comes down to one element. and one rallying cry. And Web3 is comprised of a bunch of really silly phrases, but my favorite of the silly phrases is WAGMI. And it stands for we're all gonna make it. And it's one of these things that just really struck me several years ago when I first started working in Web3 at Playboy. You know, coming out of COVID and coming out of the hardships and difficulties that we faced together, this rallying cry of WAGMI just made sense to me. We're all going to make it is the rallying cry of Web3. It's a philosophy of the cryptoverse. And when you think about it, we can't make it without one another. And that's sort of where the decentralization comes into play. The most important letter in this acronym is that W. We are all going to make it together by reinventing, by thinking big picture, by coming together to understand what art we like with one another. And ultimately, making it is such a subjective element. And what we're excited about doing today is to figure out how that works for tomorrow. You know, the last two sections in this area before I turn it over to Sam is, you know, what are NFTs? Non-fungible tokens, in essence, are individualistic elements that exist on the blockchain. A non-fungible token itself is a unique asset. We often talk about this in terms of, you know, traditional art. Think of a non-fungible token, an NFT, as the original negative of a photograph. You as a licensing individual, as somebody who owns the work, as a photographer, might be able to sell that asset, say, for example, to a museum gift shop and have them run 1,000 print edition of your image and photograph, but you're the one that retains the copyright to that original. You're the one that owns that negative. You can sell that negative for hopefully quite a bit of money, and they can make as many editions of it as they would like. But if you think about the NFT, it's the digital receipt. It is the digital original of a piece of art. And again, they can be standard, meaning if you look at the image on the right-hand side, you see an Andy Warhol screen print hanging right next to a CryptoPunk, one of Sam's favorite NFT collections. But ultimately, NFTs show meta information. It shows how many times it has been issued. It shows where it came from, and it shows who's benefiting from it financially. The wonderful part about NFTs is that, in the same analogy to those museum gift shop 1,000 unit editions, is this museum may have sold them for $10 a piece, but in 50 years, if those 1,000 units are the only ones ever printed and you can go on eBay and buy it for $100,000, the originating entity, the artist who actually made that photograph, the museum who printed those first 1,000 units, they're not going to make a residual commission on that $100,000 sale 50 years later. The NFT and the blockchain takes that out of the equation. When it is set on the blockchain that an NFT is sold by a particular individual, with commissions and royalties being paid to the originator, the person publishing it, and the creator, the person that photographed and made that asset, the distribution of any sales from now into forever, since the blockchain is infinite, means that any time that is sold now or for forever, the percentage breakdown set down on the smart contract within the blockchain will compensate the originator and the original creator forever. It's a really wonderful way of saying art is the reason we are here. The photographer is the reason why 1,000 units of this photo exist in this museum gift shop and are worth something today. And it doesn't take the artist out of the equation, which is something that is really the future of art as it relates to that WAGMI philosophy. You know, we hear what is the blockchain pretty frequently as well. And ultimately, it's a series of servers. You know, we have a really great graphic that we will send around later. I'll talk about that at the very tail end during our Q&A. But ultimately, the blockchain itself is a series of servers that allow us to put up markers. It says, this transaction happened. If you think about the blockchain as being an element, think of the blockchain as also your Bank of America or your Chase Bank backend, right? When you get paid by your employer every 15 days or so, that money is actually sent to your bank, and your bank recognizes that it has a value based on something predetermined by whatever country you live in. The Ethereum blockchain, one of many, does the exact same thing, but on a decentralized format. So the blockchain itself is actually a series of code that tracks transactions and tracks receipt of certain things. It validates and values money in a cryptocurrency format. And ultimately, it provides a decentralized way for Web3 individuals to track communities, track sales, and track finances. And again, this is one of the things that we are going to be sharing with you after the fact, but the team at Great Bowery has worked to centralize Web3's most frequently asked questions in a very easy to explore Google Doc. What we actually did is to centralize everything from what are Web3, what are NFTs, to how does my artist work here, to can I see the blockchain? I've heard of it, but I don't understand what it is. And we centralized this in a deck called What the FAQ, our Web3 edition. And again, a lot of this information is available publicly, but what we did was to centralize it in a fun way that you can explore. It's a choose your own adventure deck, all published to our Google Slides platform. And without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Sam, who can reintroduce himself to you as it relates to what he does with Great Bowery. He's going to introduce you to our favorite artist and favorite project from last year, a wonderful artist named Macbeth, and we will go through a very short case study before opening the floor for questions.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. Mildly terrifying having to follow up after you. That's brilliant. As per Jen and Pat's intro, I'm Sam. I run the global art team at B&A. I've been an agent for over 20 years, representing illustrators and animators, CG talent, and pretty much everything in between. This past 2 years or so, I've been really digging deep and exploring and trying to learn as much as I can about Web3, NFTs, and kind of all token-based activities. I truly believe that our role as agents, and I think a lot of you here are agents and artist managers, is to constantly be exploring and be aware of visual culture and making sure that not both ourselves and the artists are aware of any new revenue streams or creative spaces that we could collectively as partners make new interesting work that could also have a financial impact on someone's practice too. During 2020, the early phases, I could just see this rise in NFT chatter across all of my socials, not just from our artists, but other artists that I follow that I have a lot of respect for. And I just had to go and check it out. I just need to see what's happening. My agent brain was kind of sizzling of what's going on here? This is a whole different type of artwork. It's selling for a lot of money very quickly. People's lives being changed. I need to find out what's happening. I need to find out what the mechanics of this are. How do you do this? What does it mean? Who are the players? Is there a client? Kind of basic agent questions, really. Research. Wanted to see who the audience was, particularly conversation on digital art and scarcity piqued my interest as well, and seeing if there's opportunities for our artists and creators to become part of this platform that, like Mark said, not only allows for creation of kind of these rare pieces, but also perpetual royalties, which, is unheard of. But in hand with that, it's also a space that cherishes playfulness and gamification of an artist's work, which is basically fun, and there's no clients attached. I think also back to one of Mark's earlier points, I think, something I love about this is it is wholeheartedly artist forward. And this swing towards creativity, building community around an artist's practice, and enabling people to connect and collect an artist's work in a new way was just something we needed to get involved in. It was also a space to play with the artist-agent relationship, and build a brand around a talent rather than just wait for brands to come to them. Is that the end of that slide, Mark? Oh yeah, here we go, cool. And I think, truth is the only way to know how to do something or to be able to advise on how to do something is just to go and do it. So I think we talked internally, and our first step was to think who from our roster is a perfect candidate for this kind of Web3 extravaganza, and who can we talk to quickly? And this quickly led me to Macbeth. I've been working with him for over a decade. We've kind of worked from TV campaigns to clothing labels to everything else. He's a super clever egg, massively entrepreneurial, and outside of being an artist, he runs shops, he runs restaurants, he has a lifestyle brand, and across his socials and companies, he's got over 1 million followers who are keen to kind of explore and learn more about him. Trouble is, across that, none of those spaces were connected. They're all over the place. The music fans were there, the food fans were there, the art fans were there. NFTs and building a project around that gave an opportunity to pull all of those groups together with a simple graphic, a simple visual that enables those people to enter and become part of Macbeth's world and connect with him as an artist, but also learn more about his processes and his work. Serendipity sometimes called, you know, as we all know, in agent life, and a similar period, the Bored Ape Yacht Club, who anyone who knows about NFTs knows they're a huge, one of the biggest collections, one of the earlier ones that are now prolific. They got in touch, they wanted to work with Macbeth, wanted to work with his clothing label, The Dudes, and create a line of merch. Great timing. We did this and it launched late last year to massive success. But I think what was great with that, and also this, for me, again, from the agent perspective, this insight into this new kind of client base, community base, was that we were in touch with the founders. We were working with the founders and their teams, and everyone was so keen to share their information, to introduce us to people, to share what we did with their community, and to just bring us in, which was huge for us because this is a new space for us. So everything and anything we took on, and it's yeah, a lot of respect to the teams that we've met over time. When it comes to actual Cellmates itself, we've been a part of it from day one. We built the team. We have been running strategy on all the pre-mints. we've been speaking to other NFT communities to bring them in, and now we're brokering ongoing deals and building their brand. Again, like I said, it's changed that artist-agent relationship, because it's not just waiting for that client to come to you. It's about building and let those people come to us in a different way. It's been really hard. It's been difficult. And I think, again, that's been something that's been a fantastic learning curve, you know, because, again, I think the only way we're now going to be able to advise our client base, who are now coming to us, and we're working with lots of our traditional clients, your advertising agencies, brands direct. They've seen what we did with Cellmates. They're now coming to us to ask for our advice, to ask for introductions to our partners. And it's been an absolute roller coaster, but only in the most positive way. And I think the learnings we've had from this have been huge in helping us do that. Are you going to flick on, Marc? Cool. So the project itself, each of these Cellmates, we minted 4,207. They were at 0.333 ETH. As Marc said earlier on, we sold out in 30 seconds, which was, I'm not going to lie, a little bit terrifying, because we did not expect that. We had someone at the end of the room just shouting, 100 ETH, 200 ETH, 300 ETH, 1,000 ETH, what the fuck? And like all of us were like, holy, what the hell? And everyone in the room as a team, we decided to mint at the same time. Most of the team did not mint at the time when we sold out. Like, so I think it was only Macbeth that managed to actually snaffle one, which was brilliantly naive on our part. But again, part of this process of learning. Each of these, the NFTs themselves, they're now going to give everybody access to the Discord to start, but really it's going to start building over this next year, with the website becoming the main focus for it, with CellCTV, which is the kind of token-gated entertainment platform, where we're going to be bringing in other artist friends to come and work with Matt, do live and exclusive experiences for those holders, but also bringing in other communities who are also we're collaborating with at the moment, to start showing a little bit of the under the hood kind of experience of like what it is to be an artist, what it is to build an NFT project. We're also going to build projects on there too. So it's becoming a real creative hub. We've made a lot of new friends from it, both from a sort of commissioning client perspective, but also from artists and kind of potential partners for us in the future. So yeah, it's been wild. It's been amazing. It's been fantastic. We've had a great time, and yeah, looking forward to the future. I'm going to send some links in the chat. Doink. So go check those out. But yeah, that's Cellmates, and that's our involvement in it.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam. And before I jump into the Q&A section, 2 quick points to iterate here. The exciting thing that Sam mentioned is watching your ETH roll in 30 seconds, right? I think, the big rallying cry here is, when was the last time that a project that you worked on made $4 million in 10 days? When was the last time that a project that you work on made $2 million in 30 seconds? And I think the reality of those metrics are incredibly exciting. And it also shows not just the power of hard work, because again, the 30 seconds was about an accumulated 12 months of work for Sam, for Gregg, for myself. And it felt very, very exciting to see it happen. But I think as a barometer for the future, this idea of 30 seconds of engagement having such a maximum value for an artist and for a program is actually a really good indicator of where we're headed for Web3. And again, Macbeth was a fabulously exciting opportunity and something we were really excited to work about. But I do want to open the floor to questions, because the reality of Web3 here is it cannot exist without each one of you, without each one of us, without the artists that we work with and represent, without the brands that we work with and represent. And the difference, I think, with Web3 and a previous way of working, and I think especially in my days working in fashion PR and integrated marketing for brands, is that this is an open environment. I think most of the time, as agents, as brand representatives, you want to hold your strategies and your ideas very close to the vest, which is antithetical to Web3. The fabulous part about Web3 is we're here to talk as not just individuals in the same community of artist management, of brand representation, but we're here to talk to one another as individuals trying to change the way people behave with one another online, right? We get to set the standard for how people perceive art, for how they value art, for how consumers connect with one another, and ultimately for how Web3 is going to evolve and coexist alongside the wonderful world of Web2. And we're here to chat with each and every one of you. So please throw questions in the chat. Let us know if you have any questions about anything that you just saw. Happy to chat more generally about Web3, about what it means for you as an individual, what it means for artists in general, or to answer questions about Macbeth.
Okay, everybody, don't be shy. Throw a question into the chat.
So I'm going to add something as hold music just for a moment to what Marc just said. I think what I personally, from an agent perspective, have enjoyed about this process is the fact that it's so young and so new, and as an art space form, I don't know what you want to call that, that no one's nailed it, no one's done it right. So people are talking to each other, helping each other, trying things out, exploring like different parts of their art practice, and that is just very exciting. And I think for the agent to be part of that is important, so yeah, it's fun.
Okay, Sam, so the question's starting to roll in, so I'll throw this one out first, you guys. So how should NFTs work in the commercial photography sphere? i.e., should photographers somehow be using NFTs to advertising clients as a way to track licensing agreements and copyright?
I'm going to take half of that, because it's funny that you've mentioned that, Neil. Hello, by the way, because I was talking about exactly that to one of our animators the other day about like, hey, wouldn't it be nuts if instead of doing a character license via an invoice in an email, you do the character license via an NFT? And it's like, yeah, sure, you buy the NFT or you buy the whatever, and you have this license for X amount of time. It's on the chain. You can see the exact time that happened, and you have a period for that. So I think eventually, personally, I think that would be a great way to go, to have it on chain. Like, if there's a way to track those licensing agreements or copyrights, I think it'd be really interesting to do that.
And to add on to that, I think, the reality of tracking for copyright infringement in Web3 is very similar to what you're seeing in Web2 and generally. Ultimately, the blockchain allows an immutable ability to track that specific asset. But much like Web2 in the Web3 community, there's a factor of individuals, they call it a right-click save mentality, which in essence is saving and pirating an asset that somebody else owns. we could take a screenshot of the image that you guys see on the screen in front of you, but ultimately our brand Trunk Archive, it's a photographer named Spencer Lowell. They can license his asset. You might be able to save it to your desktop, but we can license it for bigger picture elements. The same holds true within Web3. The Ethereum blockchain, the other blockchains that allow for the trackability here give you an immediate way of doing that. But what we're finding from a licensing perspective is that copyright infringement is still prevalent in Web3. It's just easier to determine, was this copyright infringement or not, because it's tracked on the blockchain. Ultimately, it does give you, it gives you a layer of security that like standard contracts would not.
Got some other questions here, guys. So do your artists create the blockchain that is connecting with the NFT? How does that work?
Oh, great question. So the artist is not creating the blockchain. The blockchains already exist. So the best known blockchain is called the Ethereum blockchain. And again, I mentioned this, but it's a series of interconnected servers. By the way, we are an interconnected server on this Zoom chat right now. Basically, my computer is presenting this to all of you on your computers. That's a network. The blockchain itself is another name for the network. And we often hear, well, I can't see it. What is it? We can't see the internet that's allowing us to communicate right now either, but we know that they're connected using mega server hubs. The blockchain itself is something that already exists, and the artist would utilize a sales platform like OpenSea, and they would, in essence, utilize that to access that network and imprint whatever it is that they'd like to put on the blockchain in that way.
We're going to jump to something else over here, which is a little bit more tangible question. So we're definitely getting asked to price this out from clients, wondering how other agents are doing so, and if agency fee is partial ownership or standard percentages.
Another great question, and I'm sure Sam has a POV on this as well, but it really is, it's really depending on your relationship with your artist, right? And it depends on whether or not, and this is something I've been seeing, whether or not it's a Web2 native artist or you're getting a Web3 specific artist. There's a whole roster of artists that really don't have any Web2 tangible art, and they've never been published or utilized in more traditional means. Web3 artists have very specific ownership clauses as it relates to the IP in their artwork, and they generally work on an individual basis. They very rarely have representation of this type of variety. I know that there's been a number of agencies, including B&A, that have been working more diligently with Web3 artists, but what you're actually seeing from an agency fee perspective is interesting, because you can take a fee as an agency on the work that your artist is being commissioned to create in the same work for hire format that you normally would, or something more deeply in tune with Web3 is to figure out what percentages are fair in order for you to take and for your artist to take as it relates to the project based on what you imagine is going to be your sales trajectory. So I think unlike a standard deal where you take a percentage fee on a project or a standard work for hire fee, the interesting thing about agency fees in the Web3 space, and Sam and I worked on this with Matt and on the Cellmates deal, is the percentage fee that you can take as an agency and commission can be based on the royalties on what you're planning on selling. So what is your strategy to sell your NFT? That can inform how you price your fee.
Yeah, and then I think the other thing with when it comes to clients doing it, I think it's to always remember that it's artist forward. So if the client says we'll give you 2% of the sales, just say no, because that's against the stream when it comes to NFTs. It's an artist forward space, and the artist should be rewarded for that.
Sam, that's a good segue to the next question, which is, what kind of rights do clients get with an NFT? Can we put an NFT design on a tangible goods like a t-shirt?
Also a great question, and something that we've been talking about a lot internally. Ultimately, the rights to use the NFT itself, so the art associated with the NFT in and of itself is the same thing as the NFT, just to be clear. They can be pre-specified. So for example, talking about the Bored Ape Yacht Club that Sam brought up earlier, when you bought your Bored Ape token, you owned that NFT, but you couldn't, for example, sell it to H&M to put it on a t-shirt and have them sell it in wide distribution and you make a percentage of those sales. Not initially. What Bored Ape actually did is they released and they opened up the IP so that you could do whatever you choose to do with that ape. which basically gives you a sense of what's possible in the blockchain. Often when we're talking about these things, and much like any other traditional deal, we'd say try to retain as many rights as possible. You may be able to give away the rights to the token, and that token ownership value, and ultimately how much it's valued from a cryptocurrency perspective, is going to be based on how valuable it is to the person holding it. But ultimately, keep as much of the rights and ability to do with it as you'd like in the future. We've been talking about a lot of interesting NFT corollaries with fine art photographers. Those generally are something we really need to think about, because if we're minting in Annie Leibovitz asset, we certainly don't want the token holder to be able to own that asset to the point that they could, again, using the H&M corollary, sell it to them for a profit. So there are limitations and stipulations that can be pre-written.
Good questions piling in here, guys. So this one's pretty specific, but I think it's germane to Sam, your part of the presentation. So person wants to know who on our end the actual production or NFT minting, like project launch, smart contract development, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so Cellmates as an example, we had our own team, which we built around Macbeth. So we brought in 2 devs. We also brought in an outside group that we met through Marc, who helped us on other forms of strategy and what have you. But the developers on Cellmates particularly were our in-house actual human beings that we sat next to. What we have done over the past sort of year or so is also develop sort of good contact with other outside companies who can offer up that service. And they work in 2 different ways. One, they can charge you a huge amount of money because this is all new stuff and it's fancy, so they can pretty much name the price. Or they charge you a lower amount of cash, but take a percentage on the sale and then the ongoing royalties. So I think that's kind of interesting, because it's that sort of person who's in amongst all this. But yeah, those are the people that do it. It's the developers and the coding guys who you bring in.
Another question for you guys, if you have anything to add to that, is because the market is unregulated, which can lead to risks that we may be cautious about taking while the technology and framework are still new, could you guys highlight any primary areas of concern we should be aware of and how to best navigate?
I actually really love this question. It brings to mind, and I'm certain you guys have all probably seen this in your Apple News feed or on the general news cycle, but it behooves us to talk about the FTX collapse and what that is. And I think ultimately it's sort of to take 3 steps back, and I'll keep it short because it's a very complex answer. But cryptocurrencies themselves are both unregulated, but they also can be very volatile. The most stable of the cryptocurrencies, and arguably the best known, Bitcoin, is stable because the amount of tokens available in the world is very limited, meaning there's only so many of them that you can purchase, which drives value higher. Same thing with standard economics and finance economics. When you think about unregulated markets in general, there's a bunch of things happening right now. Japan is actually leading the foray into the best standardized practices as it relates to cryptocurrencies and the trading of NFTs. What we're seeing from a cryptocurrency generality in the United States related to the SEC, and what we're seeing related to regulatory filings in the UK, are finding ways to make these more accountable to public ordained governmental ordinances and other organizations. But ultimately, what happened with FTX is pretty interesting, because often I get this question of, have NFTs collapsed? Are they worth anything today, considering what happened with Sam and with FTX? Ultimately, what FTX did was to tell you as an individual, it's important to understand where you store your cryptocurrency. It doesn't mean NFTs are devalued. It doesn't necessarily mean cryptocurrency is something that you shouldn't work within, but it does show, I think, the areas of growth that we need to find within Web3 in general. One is related to regulation. If you think about what happened with Lehman Brothers or BlackRock in the past 2 decades, the US government and the UK government stepped in to bail people out. When FTX collapsed due to a number of factors, all of which you can read about in the news, there was no government to step in and to bail them out. So ultimately, it left consumers with one clear message. be careful about what you do with your cryptocurrency. It is a volatile currency. Do not keep it as cryptocurrency. Be careful about where you park it. There's, both volatile cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, more stable ones like Bitcoin and stable coins generally that you can actually park your cryptocurrency within, that allows you to better save it, but it does not devalue the value of NFTs. The three things that we need to really think about related to concern are safety and regulatory measures. How is the SEC, how is the UK government, how is Japan actually leading the foray as it relates to regulation, sales, taxes are a really big question here related to capital gains, things that you need to be aware of, especially for your artist to get them the best possible deal. The second one is interoperability. What we actually have found is that Google, as an example, now allows you to search Ethereum blockchain transactions from within their interface, which is a huge step related to interoperability. Twitter is piloting NFT programs. Shopify has integrated crypto wallet elements where you can purchase things now using Shopify platforms with cryptocurrency and your wallets. Interoperability is the next one. As those continue to grow, the value for your artist can continue to increase, because as more people can get in there, the better it is. The third area, and this is the one that's a bit more subjective, is related to regulation of thought, regulation of speech, regulation of chatter. We've heard of the dark web, but ultimately Web3 itself is unregulated. It's regulated solely by the community, as I mentioned at the beginning of our chat. So the third area to think about is this a safe place for my artist to operate? What are the risk factors related to what they communicate on? Is this a legally reasonable area for me to explore? So those would be the three things I'd really think about.
I think that something to add to that as well is that there's also this kind of this, like you say, it's new. So it's like at the moment it's very visible. It's not invisible yet. Like, you flick a switch at home, everything works. You don't think about electricity and the weirdness of that. I think a lot of things we already do in our everyday lives are already pretty abstract, particularly around money. I haven't carried a wallet forever. I pay for everything with this thing. That's happened very quickly. I'm tapping. I have no idea what's happening. Money in general has become quite abstract. But I think also the other side of that is that, NFTs are a tool. They don't necessarily have to be valuable. It's more of a key, It's I think a lot of the way that people are going to start using it is much more about, it's something you have. It's a loyalty card. It's whatever you want to call that. And it's not all of them are going to be worth millions of bucks. We get that call every day. Hey, I want to make an NFT. And I'm like, cool, why? And they're like, because we're going to put I had a client say, we want to put a Negroni on it. We're going to mint them. And I was like, what are you going to do with that? They're like, we're going to get rich and we're going to sell them. And I was like, no one's going to buy those. It's weird. Like, there's this sense that NFT equals high value, but actually NFT is just technology. It's just it's a format, and it's a entry point. And I think at the moment what's happening is there's a lot of press and weird stuff about this. This is worth millions of bucks. This is, someone else over there got robbed. But if we think about it as a tool, I think that's where it gets interesting. And I think there's already a lot of people trying to make this tech invisible. And the minute it becomes invisible and normal, and, token proof's a good example. It's someone we work with. And, they're taking that scariness of, like, if you use your crypto wallet, you're going to get all your stuff stolen. They've taken that away by putting it into a safe space. And I think the more of that happens, the less risk it is, the more people will realize this is just a useful tool. So,
guys, we have time for just two more questions here that are rolled in. So this is more conceptual, but several Web3 platforms are doing away with royalties. Can you explain what's the reasoning for this and whether you foresee this becoming the norm?
I think there's a lot of pushback on that, by the way, and I'm not sure that really worked for people. If you think about, it's like Napster or something like that. At what point, if you just take everything for free from an artist, on those sort of particular platforms, then the artist isn't going to be able to create work anyway. So you're just devaluing everything. So I think there's major pushback on that. And actually, it's interesting with Cellmates, because something we had to do, because lots of things happened when we minted. Ethereum was half the value of when we started the project. We'd have made twice as much money. FTX had just happened, but then also OpenSea had just said, hey, you got to put this piece of code into your contract, otherwise you're not going to get paid. So I think it's a really bad move, and I can't see that it would become the norm personally, because it defeats the object of it. Mark, you might have something to add to that, but
Right, aligned with you ultimately that it's the antithesis of the philosophy and premise of Web3. I think we have at every industry at every point in time seen players come in that try to monetize and try to make additional fees and revenues. It really doesn't, it goes against the grain of what Web3 is meant to be. I think there's a world in which royalties will be flexible. And I think there's a world in which the value of the NFTs sold on those platforms may still be there, just at a much lower price point. And ultimately there's a buyer for everything. But I think, you know, from a personal perspective, from an artist perspective, we are not looking in that direction.
yeah, can I suggest a question? Because I love this question, because it's something I've noodled over quite a lot, actually, which is the, I think it's from Fernando, the, have we got time for more, Greg?
Yeah, that's the last one I was going to shout out. So Sam, why don't you do that?
Okay, so yeah, just should the photographer share a percentage with the model talent? The reason I love that is because why not? Like, I mean, and that is something which I love about this is you can put on the contract, if you mint it yourself, you can ping the payment out to multiple wallets. I love the idea that, you know, if you did a shoot where you got a group of people together, like we all know the photographers need to do, where they need to pull favors, this, that, and the other, they wanted to do that on an art project and then they sold it. The thought that you could connect those people, and also within the smart contract, credit every single person. You can write a fucking story in there if you wanted to, you know what I mean? It's like, do what you like. But I personally think there's something very interesting in that, and this notion that you could share a percentage. Who negotiates what that percentage is another question. That'd be trickier, but you know, it's possible. And I personally think for art projects and what have you, why not? Be great to reward the people that have helped you, particularly if it's assistants or other people on the project, you know?
And I can add to that as well. I mean, we had real-time stuff with that. Part of also the GB umbrella is chunk archive and gallery stock. So we have weekly artists reaching out to license an image that they want to use as part of their artwork, their NFT, and we do write into the smart contracts whether the model gets paid or celebrity clearance needs to be had, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree with Sam in that space.
Yeah, I think that's something that'll finesse over time between all us lot as agents as well. You know what I mean? We'll suss out a way of doing it, but you know, who's to say it? You know, instead of an invoice, you send the image to the client. They have to buy that, and when they buy it, it pings out the payments to everyone. Great.
It does hit on Web3's philosophy of supporting the individuals that help make the art asset happen. My only caveat is that the more royalties and distributions in a smart contract, the more wallets that need to be cascaded to, the more expensive the engineering cost is. So that is the only probable limitation. How much can you afford to include those individuals? You know, Great Bowery can do that on the back end in a more traditional sense. If, for example, we carve out a higher percentage and then we provide disbursements, but ultimately, I think the dream is to find a way for the smart contract to compensate with a fair percentage how much percentage work they put into making the project come to life.
Yeah, and again, because this is all new and fresh, there's ways of doing that with code and what have you. But like Marc says, you just got to have the right people to do it. We have a couple of those on the Cellmates ones where it's like clever, nerdy stuff. It's great. It's exciting.
So cool. Well, thanks everybody, and definitely thanks Sam and Marc for sharing your expertise. And you know, hopefully you guys learned some stuff today. But as Marc said earlier, we're here for you guys going forward. Any questions or other thoughts? And Marc will be sending out via Jen the Google Doc that he had mentioned before. But otherwise, thanks everybody for attending, and hope you had a good afternoon.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say thanks to Marc, Sam, Greg, Pat. That was so insightful. Thank you so much. Reach out if you have any questions, and I will get that email out from Marc in the next couple of days.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. That was fun.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.